the council. Only 2 days ago, the nation came together in silence to reflect on this pandemic and also to remember the huge amount of people that we lost as a nation. And it's quite clear, really, that there are people here now that have lost friends, family, neighbours, colleagues during this pandemic period, and it'd be remiss of us not to remember them. And if you haven't personally lost anybody, there are residents of this district who are no longer with us. They were important, they were loved, and it's important that we remember them. So I'd like you to please join me in a minute's silence to reflect on the pandemic and importantly to remember the people that are no longer here. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you, and that's very much appreciated and necessary. So before we start, I first need to do some housekeeping. So may I first of all remind you of some domestic arrangements. Please ensure that microphones are muted when you're not speaking, that you do not interrupt other speakers. Members are reminded not to use the messaging or chat function during the meeting unless it's to report a pecuniary or non-pecuniary interest or to notify the chair that you wish to make a proposal. That if you're attending this meeting to speak and persistently interrupt the meeting, you may be asked to leave. Additionally, you'll be invited to speak and ask questions by the chair. Please await your turn. If members lose connection to the meeting, they must contact the Member Support Officer, Mandy Smith, as soon as possible. As this is a virtual meeting, you will not need to stand to address the chair. I'd like to remind everyone present that this meeting will be broadcast live to the internet and will be capable of repeated viewing. The whole of the meeting will be filmed, except where there are confidential or exempt items. If you make a representation to the meeting, you'll be deemed by the Council to have consented to being filmed. By entering this meeting, you're also consenting to being filmed by the Council and to possible use of those images and sound recordings for webcasting and or training purposes. The Council, members of the public and the press may record, film, photograph or broadcast this meeting when the public and press are not lawfully excluded. Can I move to the agenda, please? Apologies for absence.
Thank you, Chair. We have received apologies for absence from Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, and noted. Are there any declarations of interest? Okay, I can see none. So moving on to item 3, which is MC 20/27, confirming the minutes of the meeting held on the 18th of February 2021 for accuracy only. Now, before we start on this, there have been some issues with accuracy, which Councillor Warboys and Councillor Mansell have already identified, and those amendments have been made. Are there any other issues with accuracy? Councillor Mathewson?
Yeah, I've advised the committee services that the minute at 65.4 regarding the ESG, which stands for Environmental, Social and Governance, it's incorrectly government and it should be governance. That just needs correcting.
Thank you, and I'm sure it will be. Thank you very much. Are there any others? So please use the hands up facility. That way we can sort of keep a tab on who is actually trying to speak. Thank you. In that case, can I have a proposer, please? Councillor Field. And a seconder?
I was prepared to second the meeting, the minutes. I'll allow your group the right to propose them.
Okay, I'll be honest with you, I'm having difficulty seeing the hands up facility at the moment, so we'll try and get that addressed as we move along. So I got Councillor Mathewson. I believe you're trying to propose.
Yeah, I thought I might second the minutes, or was it no one's proposed them yet? All right, I will propose them with the amendments that have been notified variously by Councillors Mansell, Warboys and myself. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you. Councillor Morley, I guess you were trying to propose your second, so your hand's down now. That's good. Okay, so we do have a proposer and a seconder. I'll now ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, can you please open the vote in the modern.gov app by clicking on the plus sign in the top right hand of the agenda screen and selecting the attendance and voting button. The vote for the agenda item will now show in blue, and please click that blue line to open the vote. Thank you.
Could I just check that the blue line doesn't mention anything about the amendments to be made? Can I just check that I am voting for the minutes of the meeting with the amendments that have already been mentioned? They're not written, it's not in writing. I just want to check that I'm voting for the right thing.
Yeah, that is correct, and we can make a slight amendment. Just hang on, guys. Okay, we can't change the wording that you see in front of you. However, please rest assured that it does include the amendments that were suggested and forwarded prior to this meeting. So if you'd like to continue the vote, please.
Councillor Amoroson, are you able to vote, or would you like us to take your vote verbally?
Hello. I thought I did vote, but it's for. I'll try.
Okay. Thank you. Chair, that is unanimous.
Thank you. And the minutes of the meeting have been confirmed and will be signed the next practicable opportunity. So we're going to move on to the leaders' announcements. I'd like to invite Councillor Morley to present her update, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm really pleased, councillors, to be able to share my final announcements ahead of the various elections in May. I feel I should start, however, following our 1 minute silence, by expressing my support for all those who have been directly and indirectly impacted by the pandemic over the last year. My thoughts and prayers go in particular to those who have lost family and friends across the world, and of course in particular to our residents in mid-Suffolk. I would also like to put on record my huge thanks to all of our staff, our partners, particularly the NHS, police and county council, and of course our fantastic communities and local volunteers who have worked tirelessly over the last year to tackle COVID-19. As you will all know from the data available to the public and all councillors, progress with the distribution of the vaccine across Suffolk, and particularly in mid-Suffolk, continues to be extremely effective. I'm confident that all those who have not yet been offered the vaccine will do so in line with the government's roadmap. I'm also confident that this will also be the case for all second doses and any boosters that may be required. I will continue to meet regularly with the Chief Executive of the CCG and through the regular local outbreak engagement boards to ensure this remains on track. The infection rates, hospitalisations and deaths continue to fall in Suffolk, but it is essential that we don't become complacent now. There is no such thing as a post-COVID world, but we need to learn to adapt to living with COVID. That is why it is so essential that we have effective recovery plans, and in particular, an economic recovery plan. This work is developing well, in line with the timetable for the roadmap out of lockdown, and I will ensure it is shared with all councillors and progress reported to all councillors during the pre-election period, which starts today. The Chancellor's Freeport announcement, which includes our site at Gateway 14, is therefore really welcome news that will inevitably help strengthen our economic recovery, enabling our district to thrive rather than just survive. As you have hopefully seen, we're also really pleased to have now launched our Business Innovation Network. This builds on the success of Innovation Labs in Stowmarket, which we helped fund, and our inaugural Innovation Awards, which we hosted virtually before Christmas. Innovation forms a key part of our economic recovery plan, and subject to planning, we look forward to seeing a new innovation centre coming forward at Gateway 14. With all of this in mind, I think it is important that I also take this opportunity to remind our local businesses to recheck whether they are eligible for additional financial support from the government's COVID-19 business support grant schemes that close on the 31st of March 2021. I would now like to talk briefly about our environmental progress. As we enter spring, and with the gradual improvement in the weather, it was reassuring to see our garden waste services restart again on the 8th of March. The service was paused for a short period earlier in this year due to the impact of COVID, but I reassure all of our customers that they will not be charged whilst this service was not being delivered. More significantly, I'm really pleased to share the environmental projects which we have been able to secure with external funding. The first is £1.4 million of government grant that we have received jointly with Babergh District Council for carbon saving measures at our leisure centres and other buildings. Cabinet has also now confirmed funding of £300,000 for a pilot solar carport scheme at Mid Suffolk Leisure Centre in Stowmarket, match funded by the government's Getting Building Fund. The project will enable the council to produce energy through our solar panels to help run the leisure centres, as well as provide battery storage and a number of electric vehicle charging points. The work is due to be completed by spring 2022. The Cabinet has also recently approved £50,000 to enable the council's transfer from diesel to hydro-treated vegetable oil fuel, which will reduce the council's carbon emissions from vehicles by up to 90%. I would like to highlight our community impact and a number of community projects which the council has helped move forward. Despite the impact of COVID and the huge pressure that this has placed upon our environmental health officers, we have successfully prosecuted a company selling baked goods at various Suffolk markets, including Stowmarket. The company in question has been fined nearly £10,000 for food hygiene offences, including failure to maintain high-risk foods at safe temperatures, selling unfit food, failure to provide adequate hand-washing facilities, and failure to protect food from contamination. Cabinet has also awarded £370,000 of community infrastructure levy to support our vision to build communities with bright and healthy futures. This includes over £239,000 towards the expansion of Mendlesham Health Centre to provide increased clinical space for a variety of healthcare professionals, including clinical pharmacists, physiotherapists, chiropodists, phlebotomists and counsellors. It is hoped that this expansion will encourage hospital consultants to have outpatient clinics at the health centre, providing vital services for local residents on their doorstep and alleviating the need for them to travel miles to the nearest hospital. Sustainable travel options will also be promoted, with patients benefiting from the installation of 2 new electric vehicle charging points and cycle racks. The council has also invested in a number of health and wellbeing projects through Sill. These include £18,000 to help fund a running track at Gislingham's Church of England Primary School. That will be used for the Daily Mile initiative and by the wider community outside of school hours for local clubs. £62,532 for Hawley to improve and expand the Ron Craskell Pavilion and to revitalise King George's Field. This will support multiple local organisations, including the Football Club, Bowls Club, Scouts, Royal British Legion and Hawley Parish Council. And it was fantastic to see that the work at the new sixth form centre at Stow Upland High School, which the Cabinet supported with £2.4 million of community infrastructure levy, has recently been completed. Finally, I have the real pleasure this evening of sharing the fantastic news that we've been shortlisted for 3 different awards at this year's Iez Awards. These nominations reflect the improvements and innovation with regard to planning enforcement, our virtual High Streets programme, and most proudly, our shortlisting for Council of the Year. For those who haven't already seen them, you can watch our Chief Executive and other officers being interviewed by Easy online and our video submissions. This is a wonderful endorsement for our council, for how we work, for the priorities and direction set by our councillors, and for the amazing skill and effort of all our officers. The actual awards will be decided at a ceremony which will hopefully be face-to-face in September. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Do we have any questions, please, for Councillor Morley? Yeah, Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Morley. But firstly, I seem to be getting a lot of feedback through the speakers. So I'm not sure if it's because members have got not on mute, but it is quite difficult to hear quite clearly. Firstly, can I just say, just on with environmental health, if we wanted to acknowledge John Grayling's fantastic service, this council of 38 years. Many of us who've been here a while will know the great job that he's done. So I just wanted to acknowledge that. And with regards to a question, I just wondered whether, with regards to electric vehicle charging points and ones powered by solar PV, whether the council will support those tourist destinations such as Aldercar Farm and Bale Rare Breeds to have electric vehicle charging points in their premises. Thank you,
Councillor Morley.
I'm not aware that we are allowed to put electric vehicle charging points onto private premises, but I'm happy to ask officers to look at it, and I'll take that away.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both. I can see no hands up, so we are going to move on. Thank you, Councillor Morley.
Okay.
Okay, we're going to receive notifications of petitions in accordance with the council procedure rules, please.
Thank you, Chair. Please be advised that we have received the following validated petition, a petition with 214 valid signatures asking the council to save the school road oak tree in Elmswell. This petition will be dealt with through the usual process. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 6, we're now going to move on to questions by councillors in accordance with the council procedure rules, and I know we have a number this evening. So I refer you to the questions from councillors in the table papers, and I'll ask Councillor Mathieson to ask his question to Councillor Morley, please.
Thank you. Noting that the Endeavour House lease has a break clause which can be triggered later this year, are you prepared to consider alternatives to Mid-Suffolk District Council's headquarters remaining in Ipswich until at least 2027?
Thank you, Councillor Mathieson, and Councillor Morley to respond, please.
Thank you for your question, Councillor Mathieson. I feel as though this is a question that you have asked in different ways many times and has been answered before. As you know, this is one of the topics on which your group and the Conservative group couldn't agree when we were considering a coalition arrangement after the last elections. This isn't an issue at the forefront of my mind at the moment. I do not have sleepless nights thinking about having our HQ at Endeavour House, not least, of course, because we haven't really been based there for over the last 12 months. I do have sleepless nights about the pandemic, about the tragic loss of life, about the devastating direct and indirect impact COVID has had on so many of our residents' lives, about what we are doing to support our residents and communities, about what more we could do, about the health and well-being of our communities and our businesses, and about the other really important issues facing our residents, such as those raised in Councillor Otton's question, and the wider safety of women on our streets and in society as a whole. But I respect your right, Councillor Matheson, to ask this question, and you wish to receive an answer. The break clause on the lease, if we were to exercise it, would need to be served by this time next year, March 2022. As things stand, I have no intention of asking officers to exercise that break clause. As you know, we have successfully negotiated revised lease terms that phase the contractual increase in service charge costs. We have successfully negotiated the relinquishing of the lease for the councillor area on the second floor. This has been backdated to be with effect from November 2020. And we are reviewing the other areas we occupy so that we can build on the societal changes that have come about because of the pandemic. This will mean that we only occupy what we need, but also that we have spaces to come together, to collaborate, and to be creative, rather than lots and lots of desks. We are reimagining the purpose of our office space. Ultimately, though, in answer to your question, it would be wrong for me to ever rule out any options. And so the answer to your question is yes. But I personally will take significant persuasion to change my mind, to move away from all of the benefits which drew us to move to Endeavour House, together with our clinical commissioning groups and the County Council in the first place. I should also add, of course, as a footnote to my answer, that this is not a decision that Mid Suffolk can take alone, as our staff, who are the ones that predominantly occupy Endeavour House rather than us as councillors, of course also work for and employed by Babergh District Council. And so any such decisions will therefore have to be made in conjunction with Babergh District Council and with our staff foremost in our mind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Matheson, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, if I could, Chair. Yes, I think the answer seems to be that it hasn't been ruled out yet, but so what I would like to just ask as a supplementary then is that what plans are there for more meeting places for members and officers out in the district?
Councillor Morley.
I haven't ruled out anything and I haven't ruled in anything. At the moment, we don't need meeting spaces out in our district. I'm happy with the way things are progressing, but of course I keep an open mind on the matter.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you both. Moving on to question 2, Councillor Stringer to Councillor Brewster, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Brewster, given the agreed motion from Suffolk County Council to applaud the introduction of Freeport status to Gateway 14, clearly stating it will be a net carbon free development, can the portfolio holder confirm what will make Gateway 14 a carbon free development? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer, and Councillor Brewster to respond.
Thank you, Councillor Stringer, for that question. Yeah, we're applauding the fact that the Freeport will be on Gateway 14 as well. The aspirations of the Freeport East bid are to create a green energy hub that will help deliver net zero transport systems and complement sustainable developments across the Freeport East area. These aspirations align from our desire for Gateway 14 to deliver a high quality, viable and sustainable development with low carbon impact. This ambition has been informed through our work with the Greater South East Energy Hub and BAYES on a zero carbon feasibility study for Gateway 14. We are now reviewing the options proposed in this report and possible funding routes in order to deliver this on this aspiration.
Councillor Stringer, do you have a supplementary question, please?
Yes, I do, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Brewster, for your explanation and answer to the question. I do have to say, though, there's a slight difference in language between stating something would be carbon free, and I hope you'd agree there's a clear difference in language between stating something will be net carbon free development and that we aspire to doing it. And would you forgive me for being for then asking, if we are going to make this a carbon free development, why did we not seek to put this site forward as a site for a grid serve filling station when we had the opportunity 6 months ago? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Brewster, please.
Thank you. I don't know why we didn't put it forward for the grid, and I wasn't actually aware of that. But yes, there is a difference between aspiration and actual. I believe we're in the early days of doing this. Obviously, there is a planning application in, which I dare say you've looked at, and certainly BWB. There is this a pro app. It's a pre-app and energy consultation, but it deals with the sustainability statement. So that is already started, and that is part of the planning application. But we still need to ensure that, looking at the reports we've got, the best way to do it. And there are some recommendations within those, I know. So we have got time at this moment, and we wish to make it as zero carbon as we can. And I think we'll get that result.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on now to Councillor Otten. Question to Councillor Flatman, please.
Thank you, Chairman. The impact of the pandemic on families, in particular on women, has been drastic. The rise in domestic violence has risen to a level never seen before. The issue of childcare and support were completely ignored by the Chancellor's budget. What has the Council done over the past year to help women and parents with young children?
Thank you, Councillor Otten, and Councillor Flatman to respond, please.
Thank you, Councillor Otten. I share your concerns about the impact the pandemic has had on women and also more broadly parents with young children. As I have said before, I am immensely proud of the support that our Council has provided to our communities over the last year, and thank you for the opportunity to describe some of that support, specifically in relation to women and parents. Just over a year ago, a multi-agency steering group led by Suffolk County Council was created to address violence against women and girls and men and boys. This steering group has developed a strategy and action plan to address domestic abuse, sexual violence and sexual exploitation. As well as this strategy, our comms teams have helped promote Sexual Abuse and Violence Awareness Week through our social media. We have provided satellite accommodation for victims of domestic abuse and promoted both the domestic abuse hotline and domestic abuse outreach service. Our housing team prioritise those fleeing domestic abuse and work across agencies to support those that we house. In a broader sense, we have also helped address holiday hunger through work in partnership with Abercroft Leisure and projects delivered in Stowmarket and Eye. Chill, Chat and Play is still being delivered in Stowmarket by Homestart, Mid and West Suffolk, and supports families experiencing a range of moderate and complex mental health needs. This will soon also be expanded to provision in Needham Market. And in terms of wider financial support, we provide £3,000 to Lighthouse Women's Aid each year in revenue grant funding, and we also gave them a capital grant of a further £3,000 last year. Homestart in Suffolk received a revenue grant of £9,000, and Homestart Mid and West Suffolk also received £4,000. And of course, you'll be aware that we do also provide citizens advice with revenue grant funding. Because there has been so much going on, I have only briefly touched on the activity we have either delivered directly or influenced, but will also send a briefing note to all councillors after this meeting so that you can see more of the detail behind some of the things I have mentioned. I hope that answers your question, Councillor Otten, but happy to have further discussions outside the meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Otten, do you have a supplementary question?
Yes, just to say that I'm really pleased to hear the amount of work that has been going on, and certainly from my point of view, and I know the rest of the councils, we certainly thank all of them that have been doing that work. However, my question is that, of course, that work cannot stop, because there will be many staff and residents who are facing real problems in the coming months. So what actions are in place to help women and parents to continue with a successful life and career?
Well, as we talked about last council a month ago, we talked about our plans to rejuvenate the whole district, and I'm sure that you have those written down, and I'm sure once I send you round this briefing note on everything that's going on, you'll be very pleased, but happy to take any other points after you've seen that briefing note. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on now to a question from Councillor Mellon to Councillor Fleming, please.
Thank you, Chair. In the Council's Carbon Reduction Management Plan, we say that for housing, we will review policy and regulation for energy conservation, reduction and efficiency to understand how this can be standardised for the Council's new builds and retrofits by Q3 2020/21. And for the proposed housing strategy revised action, to prepare a broad specification for new build council stock, to include consideration of passive technologies and measures to increase accessibility by Q2 of 2020/21. So my question is this: have these targets been met, and if not, when will they be?
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. Councillor Fleming to respond, please.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Mellon, very much for your question. These come from our Carbon Reduction Action Plan, and my response to the first part of your question is we are reviewing policy and regulation for energy conservation, reduction and efficiency to understand how this can be standardised for the new builds and retrofits. Our surveyors have attended and completed a Level 5 diploma in retrofit coordination and risk management, delivered by the Retrofit Academy and Domestic Retrofit by the BRE. These courses enable the evaluation of properties within our stock that are suitable for retrofit to be identified and planned. Officers, as opposed to outsourcing, will reduce the time and delay along with saving on consultants' costs. In addition to the retrofit training, we have embarked on a programme to collect up-to-date energy performance data for every home in our stock. We're working with the Energy Saving Trust to deliver a programme of measures that are tailored to every Babergh and Mid-Suffolk owned home across the districts. The draft design guide for new homes contains a section on retrofit, and we will be continually looking to review and change this document as the industry moves towards net zero carbon homes, following PAS 2035, which is the retrofit standard. Our programme of fitting energy efficient heating continues and consistently evolves as technology improves. We've allocated a budget to energy measures for our homes, targeting properties through the Fabric First approach recommended by PAS 2035, with 1 million set aside for insulating solid wall properties. We are continually assessing the best approach to delivering these measures, working with the Energy Saving Trust, and we will be able to target homes and funding into the future. This is a new development that will become standard procedure in the coming years. I will now move on to answering the second part of your question, followed by the and. Proposed housing strategy, revised action. Prepare a broad specification for new build council stock to include
Councillor Fleming, I think you've muted yourself somehow.
I'm sorry.
There.
I don't know how that happened. Due to the impact of COVID, this new specification piece of work was placed on hold as officers were redeployed to other areas deemed higher priority. We'll be taking up this work again as we emerge from the stricter lockdown restrictions and can return to some form of business as usual. A new target for this to be completed will be later in 2021-2022. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mellon, do you have a supplementary question?
I do, Chair. Yes, thank you. I'm very grateful to Councillor Fleming for her answer and to hear about the progress that's been made. But does she agree with me that the progress generally on the carbon reduction management plan has been slow? And can she also tell me when the next audit of the council's CO2 emissions will take place?
Thank you very much. I have to disagree that progress has been slow. I think we've been progressing very quickly. I think that the steps we're taking are serious ones. They involve public money. And I am actually amazed at how fast we're moving. So I cannot agree with you on that one. I will have to refer to one of my, my director, possibly Cass Clements, could reply when the next audit is taking place. I believe these are done annually, but Cass, if you could confirm that, please.
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Chair, for allowing me to come in, and thank you for the question. So the baseline reviews are done on an annual basis. They're normally undertaken around May of each year, so we'll be moving into that process very shortly, and we'll absolutely, as soon as possible, be publishing the findings from that review, so everybody will be able to see the transfer from our emissions from 2021 and our emissions from 1920 previously.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on to item 7M, questions by the public in accordance with council procedure rules. Do we have any?
No, Chair, we don't. Thank you.
Thank you. Then we'll move on to item 8, which is MC 2028, the Overview Scrutiny Committee report. I'd like to invite Councillor Mellon to introduce this paper, which is for noting. Councillor Mellon.
Thank you, Chair. My report covers the meeting in January 2021 at which the Mid-Suffolk Overview and Scrutiny Committee considered the draft General Fund budget and the 4-year outlook. Members resolved to ask officers and Cabinet to take account of various comments made at the committee meeting when preparing the final draft for consideration by Council. Committee particularly asked that funding be allocated for planning enforcement and legal costs associated with planning. Members then scrutinised the draft HRA budget and asked that comments made be given consideration when preparing the final draft of the HRA budget for submission to Council. Committee also recommended that Council approaches the Suffolk Disabilities Forum to see if a Mid-Suffolk District Council representative on that forum would be appropriate. And then on the 15th of February, the Joint Committee carried out a review of the Local Citizens Advice Service. We received a report from the Corporate Manager Communities and a presentation from the Chief Executives of the 3 Local Citizens Advice. Following a lengthy session of questions and answers and debate, Mid-Suffolk District Council members concluded that a Mid-Suffolk District Council appointment as observer to Mid-Suffolk Local Citizens Advice would be beneficial to the Council and to the Citizens Advice and would be welcomed by Citizens Advice. There are other recommendations which were agreed, and they are set out on page 35 in full. particularly draw attention to the resolution in respect of the 3-year rolling funding review, that it be subject to indexation on an annual review basis. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. Using the hands up function, we'll see if there are any questions. So we'll start with Councillor Mansell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to ask Councillor Mellon about what his views on the timeliness of the minutes of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee, because a lot of the things that are reported in this particular set of minutes were things that we discussed at our last full council meeting, and it would have been extremely useful to have had that report then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Mansell. I believe that the draft minutes of the January meeting, I think that those are the ones you're referring to. I believe they were available to Cabinet for their February meeting, but the final minutes have taken longer to be completed. I don't know if the Chief Executive could let us know if there have been some delays in completing final minutes.
We'll just hold on for a second.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. Thank you. I'll just pause there where I had to come off mute and put my camera on. No, I'm not aware of any delays in the production of minutes. Clearly, if councillors would like to see minutes produced in a more timely way, I'm sure that's something that we can discuss outside of the meeting. Otherwise, minutes are clearly produced in time for the next meeting for them to be prepared and then approved rather than immediately after the meeting. Of course, all of our meetings are recorded, which of course adds significant value above and beyond the minutes, which purely capture the key points of the discussions, whereas the YouTube videos retained online are available for all to watch and contain the entirety of every debate.
Thank you. Councillor Mansell, are you happy with the reply? You're on mute.
Yes, thank you for your reply. I would just prefer to have it as a summary. I haven't got all the time in the world to watch videos on YouTube, but that's my view. But thank you for answering it. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any other questions for Councillor Mellon? Okay, Councillor Mellon, is there anything you'd like to say as you finish?
No, that's fine. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Councillor Mellon. And that report was for noting only. We're now going to move on to item 9, which is the Community Infrastructure Levy, Sill, Expenditure Framework, 3rd review, March 2021. I'd like to invite Councillor Byrne to introduce the paper and to move the recommendations in the report. Councillor Byrne.
Thank you, Chairman. First, I'd like to give you some background to this report. Our Community Infrastructure Levy Expenditure Framework was originally adopted by the Council in March 2018. Since then, it's been reviewed twice through the work of a joint member panel, and it was also considered by the Joint Overview and Scrutiny Committee in 2018 and in 2019. The first and second reviews led to changes to the framework and to the communication strategy being adopted in March 2019 and April 2020. It was agreed in April 2020 that the Sill expenditure framework would be reviewed again in October 2020, with any changes being put in place before the next bid round, which is bid round number 7, in May 2021. It was also understood that the joint member panel would remain to inform the third review process. That third review has taken place under the auspices of the joint member panel. You can read a bit more about that in paragraph 1.3 of the report. This report to Council and changes to Appendix A, which is the Sill expenditure framework itself, and the communication strategy, which is in full in Appendix B, are the outcomes of the review. The key recommended changes are set out in full in your report in paragraph 4.5. And I don't propose to read them out in full, but the main changes involve the Sill expenditure framework, which, as I've said, is set out in full in Appendix A, and they involve new additional criteria for dealing with Sill bids from adjoining local authorities and infrastructure providers. There are also Sill bid requests direct from schools that we made a slight change on. There are agreements to keep Sill expenditure framework under review, and that the joint member panel would remain to inform the 4th Sill expenditure framework review. And then there are the amendments to the Sill expenditure framework communication strategy, which is in Appendix B. And the recommended changes are also listed in paragraph 4.5 in full. They recommend that we provide some clear key messages on a fact sheet type basis to cover different aspects of Sill for the website. They proposed continuing with regular briefing sessions with members and also parishes in line with the requirements for regular communication in the Sill expenditure framework community strategy, which is 2 events a year. There is an alteration of wording to reflect that parish briefings will take place in a virtual setting, with the deletion of references to those briefings being held in different locations within both districts. So the key outcomes from all the changes suggested by the joint member panel are as set out in paragraph 4.6 of the report, and these include new additional application forms determining criteria and procedural changes to address Sill expenditure outside Babergh and Mid Suffolk's geographical boundaries, where such impacts warrant mitigation. Also procedural and working practice changes to ensure that Babergh and Mid Suffolk secure Section 106 monies or Sill in respect of new developments which occur beyond the district's administrative geographical boundaries, where this impacts on Babergh and Mid Suffolk's infrastructure, so that any gained contributions can be invested in Babergh and Mid Suffolk infrastructure. And we will continue to improve communication around Sill, particularly for members and parishes. Also to continue to keep the Sill expenditure framework and the Sill expenditure framework communication strategy under regular review. Before I move the recommendations, I just want to say that an exercise like this highlights very clearly just how complex a business managing the community infrastructure levy service is. It is incredibly detailed and requires the application of very disciplined and meticulous skills. We are very fortunate to have such a dedicated team working on this most important aspect of our planning work, and fortunate indeed to have Christine Thurlow leading that team. I do thank you all most warmly for your dedication to this work and for the outputs you achieve. So to conclude, I move that Council agrees these changes as detailed under the 3 recommendations in section 3 of the report. If you'd like me to read them out, Chairman, I will, but I'm just happy to leave it at that. Thank you.
I am happy for you not to read them out. They're quite in depth, and they are available to everybody to read. Unless anybody's got an objection with that and it's difficult in reading those recommendations, that's the way we'll move forward. Good. Okay, so can I have a seconder, please? And I guess that's you, Councillor Brewster.
It is, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. Yes, I'm very, very happy to second Councillor Byrne's proposal.
Thank you. Okay, we're now going to move to questions. Councillors, you may ask as many questions as you wish. However, remember this, they must be questions relevant to the subject and must be a question, so it's not a time for debate. So with that in mind and the rules, let's go to Councillor Pratt, please.
Hello, sorry it took me a while to unmute there. Thank you very much, Councillor Byrne. Now, I understand, you know, that in the review, there were considerations to include funding for sustainable travel infrastructure. But there seems to be, maybe I haven't taken enough time to read the recommendations, but there doesn't seem to be much of an obvious reference to that in the recommendations. So I just wanted to query that really, and to sort of ask about the status of that decision. Thank you.
Councillor Byrne, please.
Yes, I think, Chairman, if I may, I will ask Christine Thurlow to address that particular question. It's, as I said before, it's a very detailed and meticulous piece of work, and I don't know the answers to all the various aspects to it. So if you could call Christine Thurlow, please. And,
yes, Christine, if you could help out, please, that would be really appreciated. Or whoever's going to replace her. Tom?
Sorry. Just put a proper background on. Excuse me for that. Yes, apologies. Christine has been called away and unable to attend the meeting, so I'm here in her stead. And unfortunately, I don't have the level of kind of forensic detailed knowledge of the recent review that Christine brings, but I can commit to Councillor Pratt that within the next couple of days I'll get back to him and have a detailed discussion about the role of the Sill framework and how sustainable travel infrastructure is provided for within it.
Thank you, and thank you for jumping into the breach. Next question then, Councillor Otten, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to refer to page 167, Thurston Railway Crossing. I'd like to know just what influence that the department can have on organisations such as Network Rail when they have been offered a Sill bid of £100,000 and yet continue to fail to come up with the project which they have been paid for.
Councillor Byrne, and if you need assistance from Tom, please just call him in.
I do, please. That would be a question that I would need notice to answer, I'm afraid, Councillor Otten. So, and I think perhaps Tom Barker might give you the same answer. I don't know, but Tom, can you help out there at all?
Well, certainly we can influence, but we can't control, as Councillor Otten referred. So the money for the feasibility study has been offered. And as I understand it, the feasibility study is underway, but I'll investigate that and get back to you again within a matter of days, Councillor Otten.
Thank you. And could I just, a very, very small question, I'd like to know, is something quite dear to my heart, is why public art is being excluded from any Sill bids. I think this is important and part of our, you know, support for local artists and our community.
Yes, thank you for that question, Councillor Otten. I take it on board. I take your point. I think it's something that the working group will need to consider, or at least I'll make sure that joint member panel does take that on board when it considers the next review.
That shows how detailed I must have read the report. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Passmore, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I don't know whether I need to ask David or Tom, or probably both on this. It really concerns the remit of the community infrastructure levy. And what I was thinking about was, if we look at some of these challenges we face as we emerge from the pandemic, we've already heard from Councillor Otten about domestic abuse, but another big area, of course, is the difficulty of mental health provision that affects all of Suffolk and probably Norfolk as well. if it were the case that we needed some more facilities for helping those who suffer from mental ill health, and it was a Suffolk-wide one, would that count as infrastructure? And how would that work if it was a pan-Suffolk facility, for argument's sake? I haven't got one in mind, I promise you that. And getting contributions from other areas that obviously have the community infrastructure levy. You may want to come back to me at another time on that, Tom.
Yeah, it's a complicated and difficult question to answer.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed, a pan-Suffolk facility like that, we would expect that we would be only partners in, obviously, in the provision of any funding. And I suspect that would take a lot of discussion and a fair few meetings to sort out. Tom, can you throw any light on whether you feel that mental health provision or facilities for providing mental health could be regarded or should be regarded as infrastructure that we could use Sill for?
Absolutely. I'm through you, Chair. I'm happy to confirm that health facilities are an inherent part of the Sill expenditure framework. They are detailed within our infrastructure delivery plan in a range of different ways, and mental health facilities are as important as the facilities that are available for physical health. Indeed, most health provision would take a holistic approach and not seek to separate the two. Certainly, so Sill could contribute to the provision of those facilities. Looking at a county-wide provision, Sill would, for Babergh and for Mid-Suffolk, Sill would be able to provide a proportionate contribution towards the overall costs. I think it would inevitably be complicated because not all authorities across Suffolk have the community infrastructure levy. So East Suffolk, Babergh and Mid-Suffolk have community infrastructure levy. West Suffolk and Ipswich Borough Council don't have the community infrastructure levy. So those councils would need to presumably explore other means and other funds in order to make the relevant and appropriate contributions so that everybody was paying their equal share.
Thank you very much, Tom. Good to hear that once again Mid-Suffolk's leading the way on this. Of course, I'm sure we all agree with that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Field, please.
Thank you. Just a quick question to Councillor Byrne. Having been on the Working Party, I know that this document is, as you say, exceedingly complex and anything but brief. And I personally am concerned that some of the audience may find difficulties with that complexity and length. Would you agree that in the next review we should perhaps consider whether we couldn't make it somewhat more succinct and less complex, so that as we just demonstrate, we don't need to ask questions about what it means? Thank you.
If it were possible, Councillor Field, I would say absolutely yes. I think there is a limit to which you can distill these things down, and it is very complex. And I'm not making. I don't think I want to make any excuses for it being lengthy like that. I know that you're keen on brevity, and your contribution to the joint member panel in that respect is most welcome, and I'm sure that we can give it a good airing the next time we meet. Whether it can be achieved or not, ideally, in an ideal world, yes, I would say we should try to do that, and we are making some attempts to make as I said, there's some changes that we're going to make, new documentation which will appear on the website that will be designed to do just that, try and simplify the explanation of the process. But Tom, can you, if I may, Chairman, ask Tom to give his views on that particular point? It's a very valued question, I think.
Certainly, and again, through you, Chair, I think it is really important that we retain and maintain the detail that sits behind it. I suppose it might be useful to kind of think of the detailed framework, kind of like terms and conditions or something like that. And so the detail is really important. But I think I agree with Councillor Field that in terms of some people being able to interpret and understand exactly what they can do, we should explore some form of executive summary or something of that nature so that people can get a broad overview. But then when they're actually making bids, it is important to understand the detail, and that does sometimes require a kind of forensic look. But certainly something that clarifies and simplifies, perhaps as well as rather than instead of the detailed work.
Thank you, and Tom, thank you for your input. It's appreciated. We've now moved to the end of questions. I can see no more hands up, so we're going to move into debate. A reminder on this that councillors will only be able to speak once for 3 minutes, and that period will be timed. So who wants to start the debate? Yep, Councillor Eber, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you to Councillor Byrne and also Tom Barker for your input there. I think as being from a parish that has benefited from Sill funding at this most recent round, I just wanted to highlight the point that it does take an awful lot of coordinated work for parishes or community groups to submit a Sill bid. So, for example, in our case, there was, myself as district councillor, my fellow district councillor Keith Wellham, county councillor Andrew Stringer, the parish councils, the different groups from the Royal British Legion, the Scouts, Playing Fields Committee, Bowls Club, a football club. Coordinating all of that does take a lot of work, and those groups involved have to put in considerable work in order to actually submit a Sill application. So I suppose that while it's great that our parish has been a recipient of these, I think there is a high volume of work involved, and I want to be sure as well that we're actually getting that funding out to communities. We're bringing in a lot of Sill funding at the moment, and it's not a question for now, but for when we get to that stage of a report at another council meeting, are we really sure we're putting back into the communities the same amount of money that we're getting in terms of the frequency of funding received, and ensuring that it goes out to all of our communities. So I just wanted to make those points really, and also finally that if this community infrastructure levy was brought in some years ago now, and I want to sort of be quite confident that government isn't going to change the rules and remove that and talk about something different instead, while we're still trying to get funding out to communities. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And moving on to Councillor Mansell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like to say that there is an awful lot in this report, and I'm not disputing Councillor Field's wish to have it a little bit more succinct. I too am one for conciseness, but I do think that we as a council are we're a little bit ahead of the game in terms of our Sill expenditure framework. And I think it's extremely pleasing that we have in our infrastructure delivery plan, we have community projects, and we don't know what they are. We have the flexibility within that IDP for communities to apply for funding from the Sill funds. And I think that is, it does. I'll admit, I'll agree with Councillor Eburn. It is a complicated procedure to do so, but I think it's great that we have the flexibility that these community projects can get the funding from Sill. And I think that Christine Thurlow and her team do put in an awful lot of work, and they are willing to help communities who do want to try and apply for funding. But, you know, I will be supporting this. I think it's great that we've got the flexibility to help fund these projects in the communities, amongst other things. There are other unknown amounts of money in our IDP, and it's great to see them there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other councillors that wish to enter the debate?
I think I've just put my hand up.
Got it. Councillor Field.
Yes, just to expand a little on the question. I mean, clearly there are some differences of opinion within the working group, which is healthy, and we have come to a conclusion which is in this document. So I will obviously be supporting it. The point I really wanted to make is that while complexity clearly doesn't discourage a body like the county council bidding for a school, clearly we're looking at the other end of the spectrum where perhaps parishes are trying to forward relatively small projects. And I feel that the sheer complexity of the task and the fact that we insist on spade ready projects. For instance, they need to get planning permission before they apply. Some of those things do discourage this deployment of money to the community, which we're all looking for. So just sort of notice that certainly in the next phase of revision, I personally will be trying to forward a few of those things and hope I'll get some cooperation from other members. But it's clearly an excellent effort. We clearly have a process defined, and we clearly are providing money for infrastructure, which is what we wish to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Field. And the next question, is Councillor Mattison, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the public are continually crying out for infrastructure to match the development that's rolling forward, and I think inevitably it always feels as if we're behind the curve in delivering it. But nevertheless, it's a welcome way of raising money for infrastructure, and that's great, and certainly support the paper. I do wonder, in terms of the complexity that's been talked about and the need for succinctness and so on, whether that can partly be achieved by actually producing or extracting from it a simplified approach for parish councils and local groups in particular, where quite a lot of what's required would not be applicable, and the sorts of things that they want are within a much narrower band, and whether we could do some more in that direction to make it easier for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. And moving on to Councillor Passmore, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I just think this is an excellent proposal. I shall certainly be supporting, and I don't entirely agree with John Matheson saying we're always seen to be behind the curve, and perhaps I should declare an interest because of the funding given to the new police and fire station Stowmarket. But you know, these are really big projects, so they don't just come along all the time, and getting that ready, huge commitment from the district council, Christine Thurlow and the team. So, you know, let's look at this as a very positive development, and also bear in mind that whatever anybody says, the community infrastructure levy is paid for by somebody somewhere. Now, you could say, well, it erodes the margin of the developer, maybe, but it also potentially puts the cost of housing up. And so we've got to get the balance right. And I think these proposals are very, very welcome, and I have absolutely no hesitation in supporting them. And I do want to make the point, Chairman, if I may, to congratulate everybody, as David Byrne said at the beginning, for what a jolly good job everybody's doing here. So I hope everybody in this council will support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I can see no other hands raised. So therefore, Councillor Byrne, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Thank you, Chairman. No, this is a stage, a developmental stage of a process that we have been operating for barely 3 years, and we have achieved an enormous amount with it. I'm very pleased to receive suggestions such as we've heard tonight about simplifying the process for the smaller groups who haven't got the same capacity, obviously, as the larger infrastructure providers or infrastructure requirements. So we'll take those forward to the next review and consider them the joint member the joint member panel, and let's hope we can be discussing simpler versions for groups like that, more succinct reports, etc., etc. But as I say, it is a complex, very complex, and we have to display a considerable amount of due diligence when we're looking at these bids. There's quite a lot of money involved, and we've got to make sure it works hard for us. So thank you.
Thank you. And there's a theme there, isn't there? It is complex, and the amount of detail in this work and the diligence by yourself, by the officers, it should be noted. So thank you all for producing it. We're going to move on to the vote, but as I've said, I'm not going to read out the recommendations for this one because they are quite lengthy, unless anybody wishes me to do so. And if you do, then please raise your hands now. Good. Okay, I'll now ask the Corporate Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the vote is now open. Please can you click on the agenda item, it's now showing in blue, to open the vote. You may need to scroll down. Thank you. Chair, that was a unanimous vote. Thank you.
Thank you. That is carried. Moving on to item 10, which is the MC/20/30 response to the consultation on the future of new homes bonus. I'd like to invite Councillor Whitehead to introduce the paper and to move the recommendations of the report. Councillor Whitehead.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm pleased to introduce report MC 2030, the response to the consultation on the future of new homes bonus, which starts on page 181 of our report pack. The long-awaited consultation on the replacement for new homes bonus was finally published by the Ministry for Housing and Housing, Communities and Local Government on the 10th of February with an 8-week consultation period. Now, under the Council's constitution, consultation responses are normally delegated to the relevant Assistant Director. However, the monitoring officer has concluded that this consultation is of sufficient significance for it to be referred to full council for a response. Due to the short timescale offered by the Ministry, it was not possible for officers to prepare a draft response to be considered at our meeting today. So it is proposed that a joint cross-party working group is established to agree a response with the Assistant Director for Corporate Resources for submission by the deadline of the 7th of April. The proposed membership of the group is set out in paragraph 4.6 of the report. However, I understand that an amendment to the composition of the Babergh membership of this group was agreed at Babergh's full council meeting on Tuesday evening to include a representative from a planning perspective. The Babergh composition will now be a Cabinet Member for Finance, the Cabinet Member for Housing, who are both Conservative, the Cabinet Member for Planning, who is an Independent, and a Green Party councillor. Finally, I should also like to remind all councillors, as set out in the report at paragraph 4.7, that they are entitled to make their own personal response to the consultation should they so wish. I'd like to propose the recommendations set out in 3.1 and 3.2. I would ask for a seconder, and as always, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Whitehead, and I can see that the second is probably going to be Councillor Headingham.
Yes, I'm happy to second this.
Thank you. We'll now move to questions. And again, you are allowed to ask as many questions as you wish. However, they must be relevant to the subject under discussion and must be formed as a question, not debate. Who wants to start? Okay, we have nobody wishing to ask questions, so we will move on to debate. With the debate, you're allowed to speak once for a period of 3 minutes, and this will be timed. Who would like to start debate? A couple more seconds. Okay, it seems nobody wants to enter. We have one. Councillor Field, please. It's like asking volunteers to go over the top with bayonets fixed, isn't it? We get there eventually.
You have more experience in that, perhaps, than I, but we can't let you escape without any debate. Just you're defining quite an acceptable process in many ways. I would just slightly concern that if you said this was launched in February, it's now March. That's what, about 6 weeks away. You seem to have about 2 to 3 weeks to the end date. So presumably things have moved forward quite a bit. It slightly concerns me that obviously certain members of the opposition and of the ruling party, if you call it that, will be involved, but concerned that the rest of us will hear nothing until it's a done deal. Is there any intention for any form of communication, recognising the hazard that always brings of lots and lots of comments?
Well, I'd anticipate before it was submitted that it would be circulated to all members, and perhaps Catherine Steele could just confirm that approach.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not sure that we'll have time to circulate for comment. Say we've got just under 2 weeks now until. So the intention obviously was that the nominations would be agreed at council and they would be delegated the responsibility. There will be an opportunity. I'm trying to set up 2 meetings, so we have 2 stabs at it. So there will be an opportunity for people to talk to other group members in between those meetings to get further views if necessary. But I think we're going to be very tight in time in terms of circulating it to all councillors.
No, more FYI, really.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. We'll move on to Councillor Matheson, please.
Thank you. Yeah, looking back across the last couple of years, we do seem to have got into difficulties and contentions and so forth quite several times on government consultations, and I think it would be quite helpful if the monitoring officer could circulate, not now, but could circulate some considered general advice so that officers and the administration and the opposition were clear as to how these matters will be dealt with, because clearly in this particular case, as Councillor Field has said, it hasn't been dealt with basically until the last minute, which is unfortunate.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have anybody else that wishes to join the debate? Councillor Field, could you take your hand out, please?
Sorry.
Okay, Councillor Whitehead, it appears nobody else is entering debate. Do you have anything else to add?
Nothing further to add, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, I'll now ask the Corporate Governance, Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the vote is now open. Please, can you place your vote? Thank you. Councillor Brewster, are you having problems? Actually, it's just come through. Thank you. Chair, that was unanimously 4 again.
Thank you. That is carried. Moving on to item number 11, MC/20/31, which is Pay Policy Statement 2021-22 and Gender Pay Gap. There's a slight typo there. I'd like to invite Councillor Whitehead, not Councillor Morley, to introduce this paper and to move the recommendations in the report. Councillor Whitehead, back to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm pleased to introduce report MC 2031, the Pay Policy Statement for 21-22 and the Gender Pay Gap report, which starts on page 185 of our report. We're required by the 2011 Localism Act to prepare and publish a pay policy statement that is approved by Council, and by the 2010 Equalities Act to report on our gender pay gap. The latter does not have to be approved by Council. As the two councils have a single organisational structure with harmonised pay, grades, terms and conditions of service, a single pay policy statement is produced which covers both councils. Last year, the statement was contained in the budget report in February 20, but due to the recent changes to the senior leadership team announced by the Chief Executive last week, it was not possible to reflect these changes and meet the timetable for the February Council meeting, and hence it's being presented to Council today. Paragraph 3.3 of the report sets out the key information that is contained within the statement at Appendix A, and paragraph 3.4 highlights the changes made compared to the statement for the current year. The Gender Pay Gap report is normally published by the 31st of March each year, but due to the impact of COVID, the deadline has been extended to the 31st of October for 2021, so the report is not yet available. As we are two sovereign councils, a Gender Pay Gap report has to be published for each council, but the combined data is more relevant due to our workforce being fully integrated. And some of you may have spotted that within the risk section of the report, the first and the third risks are repeated. Now that's clearly an error, and it should only been in there once. I'd like to propose the recommendations set out in 2.1 and 2.2, and would ask for a seconder. I'd be happy to answer questions that you may have, and with us today are Suzanne Hughes, our Head of HR and Organisational Development, and that many of you will not have met before, as well as Catherine Steele, Assistant Director. Both will assist me with this. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I have a seconder, please? Councillor Penyong.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second Councillor Whitehead's proposals.
Thank you, Councillor. And yeah, going back to Councillor Whitehead, you may use those officers to support you in answering these questions. So I know they can be quite detailed. So we will move to questions. And again, as before, you can ask as many questions as you like, but they must be a question relevant to the subject and posed as a question. So let's move on straight away with Councillor Mansell, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd just like Councillor Whitehead to clarify what he just said about the Gender Pay Gap report, because I tried to click on the links in the report of our council meeting and discovered that Babergh District Council had something under the link for Gender Pay Gap report and we didn't. And when you click on the one that's listed under the Babergh District Council papers on that webpage, you come up with a report that looks like it's got both Babergh and Mid Suffolk in it. And Councillor Whitehead just said that they had to be treated separately. So could you just please explain to me, maybe I've read it wrong.
Councillor Whitehead, please.
Yes, well, my understanding is that the report hasn't yet been prepared. So, and I must confess, not expecting it to be there. I haven't even tried to click on the link myself.
It is a 2019 report,
oh,
but,
that's an old,
but I was just looking to see what it was really.
Yeah, that's last year's one. So this year's one, has been delayed and will be available prior to the deadline.
And it is going to be a separate one, is it? Did you say Babergh and Mid Suffolk had two separate ones?
Let me just remind myself just a moment. Remind myself what I said. Yes, we have to prepare two separate ones, but then there is a combined one of data, which basically is a more relevant one.
I'll bring in the CEO after, please.
go. There we go. I think I'm off mute. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, as Councillor Whitehead said, we're obliged to publish as separate organisations a gender pay report for each council. But of course, it's a nonsense because of the way in which we operate. And so what we would tend to do is contain that within the same document. So you'd be able to read the Babergh figures notionally and the Mid-Suffolk figures notionally, but more importantly, be able to see them together so that we both comply with the law, but more importantly, we also comply with common sense.
And they will be linked from both sections of that webpage, not
Absolutely.
just the Babergh one.
Absolutely, of course, yes. And the website itself obviously has different front skins in terms of the addresses. A lot of the content is the same, but yes, you'll be able to access it from the www Mid-Suffolk webpage.
Thank you for the clarity. Okay, we'll move on now to Councillor Geek, please.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just say that we do have an awful lot of links on our website labelled as Babergh, not Mid-Suffolk, and it is very irritating to have to explain to residents. But my question is, why, if we know the data on the gender pay gap, if it's already been prepared, why is it not being published? I mean, it says in paragraph 1.19 that it has been prepared. So if the work has been done, why isn't it there for us to read? It doesn't seem sensible if the work's been done to say, oh, well, COVID, that's caused the delay. The work's been done, surely.
Councillor Whitehead.
Well, there is a need, as explained, to then effectively consolidate two sets of data from the two separate councils. But beyond that, and rather than just having, as well as being just a data dump, if you like, there is the narrative and explanation behind it, and also I think it gives the SLT a chance to sort of look at that and see what they can learn from it as well. But again, if either the CEO or Catherine Steele wants to just add to that explanation. Or not.
There we go. That took an inordinate amount of time. Simply for me to say, I don't think there's anything I can add, but thank you, Councillor Whitehead. I don't know whether Catherine wishes to add anything, but I think you covered it.
Thank you.
Catherine?
No, thank you, Chair. I don't think there's anything I can add to that either. Thank you.
Well, I'll just restrain my impatience then. Thank you.
So to look forward to over the summer.
Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Whitehead, for that report. I would just like to ask again, and I'm sorry to labour the point that Councillor Mansell has made, but when you go to the transparency section of the website, it does say under Mid-Suffolk there is nothing for gender pay gap. So please, can we fix this in advance of this document being the gender pay gap work being prepared? As otherwise, anybody looking at our website would think that only Babergh is concerned about gender pay gap and not with Suffolk. And as it is a requirement, I think that web link does need to be fixed. But secondly, with regards to the gender pay gap report, will this be circulated to all members when it's available and not just on the 31st of October? Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you. Alex, the CEO is going to come in on this one.
I got in advance on that one because I thought it might be helpful rather than waiting to come in. Yes, absolutely. We'll make sure it's circulated to all councillors at the same time that it's published on the website. And yes, we'll go away and look at that link to make sure it's fixed.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all. Councillor Otten, please.
Yes, as a result of that, I am somewhat confused because you state that you do not need to do an equality impact assessment because it's the same as last year. But can you just explain, if you haven't got the report, then how can you categorically state you don't need to do a EIA?
Back to the CEO.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't know whether Councillor Whitehead wanted to answer it, but rather than me jumping in, but if not, I will
I'm
answer.
happy for you to answer that one.
That's very kind of you. Yes, so the predominant subject for this report isn't the equality statement, the gender pay gap statement, sorry, it's the pay policy. So when there's reference to the equality impact statement, that's referring to not the need to do so in relation to the pay policy, and hence that statement. Clearly, the very nature of a gender pay gap needs to be assessed in terms of any equality impact, and more particularly in terms of not just what our gender pay gap is, but more specifically the actions that we'll be taking as a result of that, because the action plan is bluntly more interesting and more significant than the statement of the data. So clearly that will take into account any equality impact issues as part of that exercise.
So will that report then be available?
Sorry, I was too quick there, turning my camera off. The equality impact assessment, yes.
Thank you.
I can see no more hands up for any further questions, so we will move to debate. Each councillor will be allowed to debate once. It's for 3 minutes and you will be timed. Don't keep me waiting this time. Who wants to start debate? Okay, I'll give you a few more seconds just to think about it and then we will move on. Councillor Otten, please. You're on mute, Councillor.
Yeah. Could I just clarify then that what we're actually voting on, if we haven't actually got the report?
Councillor Whitehead, if you could be specific, please.
Yes, we are voting on the pay policy statement, and also noting that in due course the gender pay gap report will be available online and by the deadline. Well, voting on the recommendations as set out in those paragraphs 2.1 and 2.2.
Councillor Otten, do you wish to enter debate?
No, that's fine.
Okay, thank you. And Councillor Mansell, please.
I'm just on mute. Thank you, Chair. Sorry if I'm being a little bit dense, but recommendation 2.2 states that we are recommending to the recommendation to council that the publication of the council's gender pay gap as of the 31st of March 2020 be noted, but it hasn't been prepared yet, so I'm not quite sure how I can note it when I haven't seen it.
CEO, please.
Yes, apologies if that wording is confusing in any way. You're effectively noting when it's going to be published.
I'm just going to bring Emily Ewell in as well, which will assist us with this. Emily.
Thank you, Chairman. I wonder if the recommendation 2.2 might easily be rectified by adding in the words after that, the delay to the publication. So if those 4 words, the delay to the publication be added in, that would then make the recommendation more logical in terms of the delayed publication date that we've heard about in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'll go back to the proposer and seconder, please. Thoughts?
Well, to be honest, I did wonder myself whether some extra wording might be usefully added in prior to the meeting. So yes, I'm more than happy to take those on board.
And seconder, please.
I'm also happy to take those on board, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. We're just going to rewrite that 2.2 and then we'll move on shortly. Does anybody else want to enter debate? Okay, nobody. So what we're going to do, we're just going to take a quick pause. We're just going to reword 2.2 and then we'll move on. So bear with us.
Chair, the voting is now ready. It has been amended to read as amended by the monitoring officer and detailed in the report. So if councillors could now go to the vote and place their vote, please. Thank you. Chair, thank you. That is 32 for and 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. That is carried. Before we go on to item number 12, we're going to take a 5-minute recess, just stretch your legs and to get our minds back in gear with some water. So be back in 5 minutes, please. Welcome back, everybody. We're now going to move to item 12, which is MC20/32, the appointment of the Independent Remuneration Panel. I'd like to invite the Corporate Manager for Governance and Civic Office to introduce the paper.
Thank you, Chair. The current panel that was appointed in 2016 has now reached the end of their term. Under the Local Authorities Members' Allowances England Regulations 2003, the Council is required to establish and maintain a panel known as the Independent Remuneration Panel to make recommendations and amendments of the Members' Allowances Scheme. A recruitment exercise has been undertaken. Candidates were selected from applicants who had made a formal application and underwent a competitive interview. Council is therefore asked to approve the formal appointment of the recommended panel members for 4 years, with an option to extend this for another 4 years, and also to confirm the fee payable for each review and the payment of reasonable expenses. Happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you. And can we have a proposer, please?
I'm happy to propose, Chair.
Thank you. And I guess, Councillor Bruce, you're going to second.
I'm happy to second.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are going to move on to questions. And again, as we said before, you can ask as many questions as you like, but it must be relative to the discussion point. So who would like to ask any questions? Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you, Jan, for that introduction. I just wanted to ask if we know when a review is likely to take place. Thank you very much.
Chair, yeah, we're hoping to start the review as soon as possible so that we can get the timing in to get recommendations to Council by hopefully the end of the year to allow for the correct timing before the next district election.
Thank you.
Councillor Stringer, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I was slightly alarmed at that answer, and I'll explain why. Voting on your own allowance is probably one of the most damaging things you can do as a councillor. I hate doing it. I don't think I should be put in the position to do it, because I think while in an office, to vote on what you should be given for doing the job you're doing without there being the chance for the public to vote on it, I think is wrong. And the timing of precluding that position is in our hands. At the moment, I can't speak for other members here, but I can honestly say the casework load that I have during the pandemic has been exponentially large. So for someone to do a review of the work I'm doing right now would give a wrong indication of the whole of the term. So I would
Councillor
make sorry.
Is this a question?
Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay.
Could
it sounds like debate to me. So let's get to the question.
Okay. The question is, can we make sure the timing of the review means that the last action of this council's term is to vote for any raise or otherwise in allowance, so that the public get a chance to vote in between that allowance being levied and those needing to go through an electoral cycle before they can claim it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. If I could just come back on that. Councillors, the review can be undertaken at any time, but councillors could choose to implement a delay on any recommendations that they wanted to agree.
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
That still means that we are voting while in the term for our own raise. I'll just make that point. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions?
You've gone silent.
Oh, sorry. My apologies. It's my microphone. So we're now going to move to debate. You can each speak once. You will be timed and you have 3 minutes. Who would like to start debate? Councillor Geek, please.
Thank you, Chair. I would just like to say that I will be voting for the recommendations for appointing this panel, but I'd very much like to second Councillor Stringer's point that we should not be timing this within the term that we are elected for. It should be the last action of the council, and that should be standard procedure. So I would like to second him on that.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to enter debate? I'll give you a couple of seconds before we move to the vote. Okay, and Jan, would you like to add anything?
No, I have nothing else to add. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. In that case, we'll move to the vote. I'll read out the recommendations on this one so we're clear before we go to the vote. The recommendation is 3.1 that the following persons be appointed to the Council's independent remuneration panel: Amanda Orchard, Sarah Way, Monica Calbio, John Clough and Sue Putters. That the IRP members each be paid £500 for each review carried out and reimbursed any expenses reasonably incurred in the performance of their duties. And 3.3 that the IRP be appointed for a period of 4 years with the option to extend this for another period of 4 years if required. And I'll now ask the Corporate Manager Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the vote is now open if you'd like to proceed to make your vote. Thank you. Chair, that is 32 for and 1 abstention. Thank you.
Thank you. That is carried. Moving on to item 13, council appointments. Are there any changes to placings?
Yes,
Councillor
Chair.
Morley.
Yes, Chair. Thank you very much. I'm really pleased to announce that Councillor Paul Ekpengyong has been appointed to the board of Gateway 14, and also that Councillor Harry Richardson has been appointed as Cabinet Member for Health and Wellbeing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now move to agenda item 14, which is motions on notice. And before we go on to this, you may have wondered why we're going to the vote on this, and therefore I'm going to invite Emily Ewell to explain the reasons. Emily.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I have had some queries about whether this motion relates to a council function or an executive function. So I'd just like to provide some clarity, if I may. The actual review of green space is an executive function, therefore it will be the role of the Cabinet to determine the format of the review and to oversee its progress. However, in voting tonight, the Council is expressing whether or not it supports the principle of undertaking a review, and if the vote is in the affirmative, the matter is then passed to the Cabinet to take forward. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, that's very clear. So we will move to 14A, which is to consider the motion on notice received from Councillor Eburn. Councillor Eburn, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. This is a motion that the Council carries out a review of green space to ensure that it is optimising the biodiversity and wellbeing aspects of natural and amenity green space in Mid-Suffolk. During the last year, the importance of green spaces to our communities has been highlighted, with more people than ever taking advantage of local outdoor space. Green spaces are important for many reasons. For health, both mental and physical, we know that social prescribing can work, that people with access to green space live healthier lives, that exercise is beneficial, and that time spent outdoors improves our mental health. As green lungs in the centre of towns, where homes have small or no gardens, access to green space in our towns is vital. It provides areas for exercising, for dog walkers, for nature, and an area to combat pollution. Green spaces are important as wild spaces for children to run free. When so much time is spent in front of screens, whether for play or for school, children need an outlet for their energy, which is unrestricted, an area where they can create their own play and just be in nature. And green spaces as areas to attract visitors in our villages, green centrepieces full of wild flowers that inspire visitors to stay a while and make our residents proud. As areas for wildlife, for wildflowers, for greater biodiversity, in responding to the climate emergency, we should be prioritising areas for biodiversity, ensuring there are ponds, trees, hedges, areas of rough ground, habitat for all types of creatures and plants. And green spaces as areas of historical importance, pieces of land that have historical significance, that are found on old tithe maps and in local histories. But also simply for their beauty, and beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A rough, scrubby patch of land can mean as much as a wildflower meadow or a copse of trees. We should be creating new opportunities for green spaces to positively look for new areas and where there are gaps. But it's not just about green spaces per se, but about the availability of them and access to them. In our rural area, people often have to travel more to get to a green space. Natural England proposed a standard for green space provision that everyone, wherever they live, should have accessible natural green space, no more than 300 metres or 5 minutes walk from home. And this does not refer to privately owned farmland or footpaths, but publicly available and accessible areas. They need to be accessible. The ability for a parent with their toddler to be able to walk to, for someone to cycle to, for a wheelchair user to access. We cannot exclude anyone from this. And where we have green spaces, we should be looking to enhance them, improving biodiversity, improving access, letting them work for people. These spaces should be publicly owned by the community, by local councils, even by the district council, covenanted so that no development can ever be undertaken on them. And finally, we need to protect the spaces we do have, ensure that our green spaces are designated as such, as local green spaces as defined in the National Planning Policy Framework, and set up a directory of local green spaces and add to it each year. The Council has already agreed to draw up a supplementary planning document for green spaces in new developments, but this motion is about our existing green spaces, enhancing them, protecting them, and finding new spaces in our towns and villages. Ultimately, we need to value green space more. Our communities have shown that they both need and value them. Green spaces are incredibly important for health, mental and physical, as green lungs in the centre of towns, as wild spaces for children to run free, as areas to attract visitors, as areas for wildlife, for biodiversity, for their history and simply for their beauty. As councillors, we need to ensure that the council works for our communities and supports them in areas of importance to them. Green spaces and access to them is one such area. We need to put more effort into this, into showing our communities we are listening and that we value what they value. A review of green space in mid-Suffolk should bring this to light and lead us to action in this regard. I have great pleasure in commending this motion to you, and I would really ask that we could have a unanimous vote for all councillors in favour of it. But firstly, I would like to ask my colleague, Councillor Fleming, to second this motion, and I'm most grateful to her input in this area. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Eburn. Councillor Fleming, would you wish to second?
Yes, thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Councillor Eburn. I am very pleased to second this motion, and if you would like me to speak now, I can go ahead.
Yes, you can, or you can reserve your rights. It's entirely up to you.
I'll say what I need to say now. Thank you. I think Councillor Eburn and I clearly agree that there are many reasons why accessible natural green space, or ANG, as it's called, is important. I think she's mentioned the important things: health and well-being, mental health, physical health, wildlife, education, sports, clean air, and happiness. Open space conveys a sense of well-being and permanency that is fundamentally reassuring in a world which is becoming increasingly stressful and hurried. The Mid-Suffolk and Babergh Open Space Study, which was prepared in 2019, supports our joint local plan. This refers to a number of largely aspirational standards for accessible open space of various kinds: allotments, recreational space, parks, and woodlands. The standards for open space have been evolving since 2003, and the implications of putting these aspirational standards into a working practice are complex, and I believe that they should not be overly rigid. I think our approach to implementing this motion, once we get to grips with it, should be twofold. Firstly, we need to review what we've got. The Open Space Study of 2019 contains a lot of information, if anyone has a chance to look at it, about the types of green space that we already have, ordered by parish, and is an excellent starting point. But we need to take that further. We need to put plans in place to optimize and use these assets and identify gaps, understand what type of open space may be needed to supplement what we've got, and take into account the new planning context, growth pressure, the pressures of biodiversity loss, and link these with our emerging health and well-being strategy. The Open Space Study suggests several strategic options: existing provision to be protected, existing provision to be enhanced, opportunities for relocation or redesignation, etc., etc. And I think one of the implications of the Open Space Study is that we need to think carefully about how we define open space itself. The open space definition used by Natural England is fairly rigid and has some problems of practical application, particularly in areas of Mid-Suffolk that are rural and actively farmed. To conclude, I feel that this motion gives us the impetus to take action on the objectives in the existing Open Space Study and the emerging JLP. It is acknowledged that a supplementary planning document is the best way to set out how the standards should be interpreted and applied. I would like to see joint arrangements in place so that the health and well-being aspects of open space are fully considered as well. And I'm confident that this will be the case. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. We'll now move straight to debate, as this is a motion. So I can see Councillor Morley's waiting.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Fleming's spoken and Councillor Eburn have both spoken really eloquently about the green space and the biodiversity aspects of this motion. It is well recognised that mental health is a key as well to physical health, and so green spaces for me are so important in terms of our residents' health and well-being. So especially in our more urban areas, I am really keen to see what we can do to increase access to open spaces for people in our towns, Stowmarket and and Debenham and Needham Market, because it can only contribute to our overall health and well-being. I'm sure others will be able to speak far more eloquently about the health and well-being aspects of that, but I'm really happy to support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. We're now moving to Councillor Passmore, please.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I too am delighted to support this motion, and I would like to echo what everybody has said so far. And it gave me cause to reflect on how jolly lucky we are in Mid-Suffolk, most of us, because we do live in such a very pleasant area, and that does include most people who live in the more urban parts of our district. And it gives me cause to reflect, as I was saying, on those who have had the misfortune during lockdown, let's say if you're a single mum with 2 or 3 young children, 10 floors up, say in the middle of London or any of our other great cities, how terribly, terribly difficult it must be for them. So that brings into sharp focus the need for looking at this in a pragmatic way for people's mental well-being, mental health, physical exercise, all of these things come together. So I think this opportunity for us as a district to lead the way once again is very, very welcome indeed. And I had cause to reflect on that further. I delivered a package down to Mickfield today and came back home, like many of us do in Suffolk, round the back. And it's incredible how much fresh planting has been done by farmers and others there. And I hope all of this will contribute to making Mid Suffolk an even better place, because it is working with others as well. It's not just down to the district. We can help facilitate it. So I think if that's all included in what we're doing as a review, then that's going to make us a very good place to live, work and travel in. So I shall be supporting this up to the hilt, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Passmore, thank you. Councillor Richardson, please.
Thank you, Chair. I wanted to follow on from what Councillor Morley was talking about, but actually if I can make reference to what she said at the end, I don't think I can put it, or I don't think any of us can put it more eloquently than she did, because I think she's absolutely hit the nail on the head, that the access to open green spaces, that's the sort of the driving force behind this motion, is absolutely essential in terms of improving people's health and well-being, be that physical health in terms of access to open green spaces for exercise and activities that can increase people's physical health, but also that access to open areas and to the countryside that can increase people's mental health and well-being as well. And I think, notwithstanding the other important aspects of this motion, I think that's a really important consideration as far as what we're debating. And so I would just thank Councillors Eburn and Fleming for their collaborative approach in putting forward this motion. And I'd absolutely echo what Councillor Eburn has said, as I hope we can all support this motion and that it can be a unanimous vote at the end of the day. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And moving on to Councillor Mattison, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I shan't repeat all the very correct words that have already been said. What I wanted to do, though, was to ask Councillor Byrne if he will undertake to retain in our emerging joint local plan the designation of visually important open spaces, because some of these absolutely fall within the definition that we've been discussing, and it is often important in the planning committee to recognise these designations in weighing up the balance of difficult decisions. And we have lost so many small pieces of nevertheless valuable biodiversity in recent months and years. And so I think keeping that designation would be very helpful to supporting this motion, which I of course do support. Thank you.
Thank you, and I'm sure that Councillor Byrne has taken that point on board. Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Scarf, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I too would welcome the motion. I think it fits perfectly with what we're aiming to do regarding health and well-being, our contributions to climate change and biodiversity. And indeed, if passed tonight, there are a number of ways that we could pay for the implementation of such a review, because we agreed various pots at our last council meeting, and at least 3 of those pots could be tapped to pay for it. In terms of personal preference, I mean, I think I would always prefer for public realm to be heavily involved on our behalf, rather than development companies in terms of estates. So I'm straying into, if you like, new development. But I think ultimately villagers and residents and parishes, if they have control of their open spaces, that would be far more preferable. I just wanted to comment on the supplementary planning document that's in preparation, because I think anyone who lives in an urban area such as mine would recognise that we do also actually have a need to ensure that the green spaces on new developments are actually delivered. They're often a key reason why someone would move to a new estate is the green space that's allocated within the planning application. But I have one in my ward that's been fenced off for 3 years and is still not available for members of the public on an estate which has now completed its first phase entirely. So I think we do therefore need to ensure, not just going forward, but we also look backwards in this review to ensure that those important urban green spaces are actually delivered. Because I think if any of our residents in my ward were listening tonight, they'd go, well, it's all very well, you know, it's all good, but what about our green space? So we've got to encompass everybody's green space and ensure that is delivered. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Warboys, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'd like to speak in support of this motion. It does indeed respond to local needs and well-being, but it's also part of much wider issues. I'd like to draw members' attention to the Dasgupta review, The Economics of Diversity, published by the Treasury Department in February 2021. It demonstrates that in order to judge whether economic development is sustainable, we need to adopt a system of accounting that is inclusive of natural capital. It also argues for a paradigm shift from considering ourselves masters of the planet to recognise that we are embedded within and dependent on the biosphere. This is clarified by guidance from the Department of Environment, Food and Rural Affairs. In March 2020, they said, at its simplest, a natural capital approach is about thinking of nature as an asset or a set of assets that benefit people. And biodiversity can be thought of as a core component of natural capital with multiple effects on social and economic welfare. Perhaps the loss or gain of natural capital should perhaps carry more weight in the balance sheet of development, and this motion is a step in the right direction to evaluating our natural capital. We certainly do not want to fall into the trap of, in the words of the 70s Joni Mitchell song, don't it always seem to go that you don't know what you've got till it's gone. I look forward to when the yearly financial report of the Council includes not only how our financial reserves have grown, but also how our carbon emissions have reduced, and quite literally how our reserves of natural capital have grown. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And Councillor Geet, please.
Thank you, Chair. Could I make a plea for our green spaces, whether that's new or existing ones, to be truly communal and to be encouraged as meeting places so that people can meet safely outdoors, specifically to combat loneliness and isolation? They are essentially our outside living rooms. They're our outside meeting spaces, and we should all be encouraged to use them as much as possible. Thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Byrne, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back a little bit on what Councillor Matheson was saying about the retention of the visually important open space designation in our emerging joint local plan. I think Councillor Matheson well knows that the time has probably passed to reinstate that in the Reg 19 version that will be submitted for examination. But in these rapidly changing times, it is important, I think, that we consider reviewing that joint local plan, well, almost as soon as we adopt it, so we can have done quite a bit of work on the review. Now, it's perfectly possible to reconsider the designation of things such as visually important open space, special landscape area, etc., which have given way at the moment to different policy framework. And to Councillor Warboys, I'm very familiar with not as familiar as I'd like to be because it's 600 pages long, with the Dasgupta report. And I think it is a very, very important piece of work that we all ought to be aware of, and we all ought to take it to heart when we're thinking about where we're going, how to plan for the future, how to incorporate natural capital accounting into everything that we do, and I think that includes planning as well. So yes, we're moving in the right direction on many of these things. So and so far as Councillor Geek is concerned, I hear what she's saying, but different open green space. We can't have biodiversity in quantity alongside human beings in quantity. The two don't go together. There will be green space that should be set aside more or less for biodiversity, but that doesn't mean to say that we shouldn't be working hard to create green space for people as well. So I'm all for this motion. I think it's a very good step in the right direction. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Mellon, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, of course, I welcome the motion. Just one thing that I'm a bit concerned of, and that is that open spaces within new developments are often problematic. A developer may try to keep the provision of open space down to an absolute minimum and pass the open space on to someone else as quickly as possible. Local councils, I speak as a parish councillor, but I'm aware that many other councils feel much the same. They have a desire to make provision for their residents, but often they don't have the necessary expertise and resources to maintain and improve the open spaces within their parishes. Perhaps what is needed most to encourage local councils is access to free advice and funds so that they can maintain them. I think open spaces are best kept in the hands of local groups, not in development management contractors. And one other thing I would ask is, could the review look at green spaces which have poor access? Access for the mobility and visually impaired is essential. And green spaces which are not being satisfactorily maintained, and could they recommend how best to improve access for all? Not on a specific basis, but some general advice to parish councils and the like. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Moving on to Councillor Mellon, please.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Obviously, I'm supporting this motion, and I think it's very important that we have green spaces in our towns and urban areas, and we can look back to some very far-sighted people in the past who in planning our towns and cities put aside land for green spaces, and that is some of our most historic and well-loved parks that are still here today. But we also need green space in the countryside. Now, that may seem strange. I live here in a village and we have countryside all round us, but in actual fact there is very little open access countryside. If you go to the national parks or to Scotland, yes, you can roam about, but obviously here in mid Suffolk we live in a largely farmed landscape, and we can't have people just wandering willy-nilly through crops or roaming their dogs on fields with sheep and that sort of thing. So yes, we have footpaths, we have bridleways, and they're very useful, but we also need usable green space in the countryside. And we have village greens, we do have some open space, and we have I think in Mellis, one of the biggest village greens in the country. But we do need usable space, and sometimes we see green space in our planning applications and it looks great, and then when you dig down into the detail, it turns out to be an attenuation basin which may or may not be accessible, often fenced off, or it's green space that's going to be under a management company, and this deters everybody from using it. So I support this, and I very much support the fact that we should try and facilitate our parish and town councils to identify and get hold of green space in the countryside as well.
Thank you. Councillor Flatman, please.
Thank you, Chair. We really are so lucky in Mid Suffolk. I mean, you're talking about urban. We don't have urban here at all. Needham Market. Oh, yes, we're having quite a lot of development in Needham Market, but all you've got to do is just walk down the road and you come to our lovely Needham Lakes that we are investing so much money in. And we have made that so accessible with our Saving Place loos so that we can have schools there with special needs. They can go in there. There's a hoist. You know, and the nature is there for the schools as well. So I think Mid Suffolk District Council are doing all they can to make sure everything is accessible for people. And, you know, I think we are so lucky. I mean, we do have footpaths. I mean, I live in the middle of nowhere, but I only have to step out the door and there's people going down here in their drones because they've just got footpaths all around. We have some fantastic footpaths. So, I mean, it doesn't take many. I mean, I think you can walk probably 100 yards in most places and nearly get onto a footpath. So, you know, I think we are so lucky, and we just have to make sure that we keep these areas lovely for following generations. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Moving on to Councillor Carter, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, we certainly are extremely lucky in Mid Suffolk. Don't know if I've actually unmuted myself or if I pressed the wrong button. Yeah, sorry. Okay. We certainly are lucky to be not a very urban area. Unfortunately, we're not the best luck on accessibility. A lot of footpaths aren't the most accessible. We are extremely, we are a preferable place right now for this motion to that we can ensure that all our green spaces are accessible to all, that we we can review the biodiversity, which is surprisingly easy to have quite a dense biodiversity and have it with the people, such things as clover and which will in the grass, daisies will actually take down carbon in its droves, and it actually they benefit from being walked on. So we can ensure that we have the right planting area. We can ensure we have the right the mix. We can ensure that green spaces that we have are being managed correctly, which we do have areas which have the wrong plants in invasive species, such as in Stowthorne. We have areas closed off, which we're trying to actually remove these out. So with this review, we can ensure that we are put on the right track, that these are accessible for all, and that even once planted up, that they can remain healthy for generations to come. So I will definitely be supporting this, and we can finally start making up for damages that have been done the past couple of years. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Anybody else wish to come into the debate? We'll just give you a couple of seconds. Okay, we'll go back to Councillor Eburn. Would you like to add anything?
Thank you very much, Chair. Yes, if I may, I'd like to thank all my colleagues. I'd like to across the chamber, as it were, virtually, for their comments and contributions to this debate. I think it's been very positive. And at the beginning of my proposal, I gave 7 reasons for the importance of green spaces. The first being for physical and mental health. And I look forward to seeing how this aspect can be incorporated into a future health and wellbeing strategy. Definitions of green space are important, but again, I'd leave that to our public realm and planning policy colleagues to advise us of what will stand up under scrutiny. But ultimately, with this motion, we really need to listen to our communities and to be able to provide more accessible green space and enhance those that we have. And I really look forward to a meeting in the future where we hear back, we hear a report showing that we've all contributed to, showing how we've increased this resource for the benefit of residents and visitors alike. So thank you very much, Chair, and I will hopefully everyone will support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Eben. So I'm now going to ask the Corporate Manager, Governance and Civic Office to conduct the electronic vote.
Thank you, Chair. Councillors, the vote is now open if you would like to place your vote. Thank you. Chair, that is a unanimous vote for. Thank you.
That is carried. Okay, so we've come to the end of the meeting. Thank you all for your contributions, not just tonight, but in general. It is worth it, it is important, and it is valued. Whether you're an officer or whether you're a councillor, it all makes things work. So thank you, please keep it up. The next meeting will be the annual meeting on Monday, the 24th of May at 5:30 p.m. I look forward to seeing you all there. Stay safe and thank you again for tonight.